Have you ever heard someone make a snap judgment about Filipinos and English? Maybe it came from a foreigner on a TV interview, or maybe you scrolled past it in a casual online comment. Oh, Filipinos speak broken English, they say. They might know a few words, but they'll never keep up with the rest of the world. It stings, doesn't it? Quiet, sharp, like a pinprick to the heart, as if someone just dismissed one of the things we hold most dearly, our ability to connect, to speak, to make ourselves understood. But what if I told you this? The very same people who mocked Filipinos for broken English would later have to swallow their words. What if I told you that one morning, when the results of a global test were released, the Philippines didn't show up as the underdog the world expected, but as a giant standing shoulder to shoulder with the best? It sounds unbelievable. And yet, that's exactly what happened. Now, I could tell you this story through charts, numbers, and statistics, but that's not how truth really reaches the heart. Instead, let me tell it through the eyes of someone who once carried the same prejudice. His name is Michael. Michael is an American businessman in his 60s. The first time he landed in Manila, he carried his stereotypes like baggage heavier than his suitcase. In his mind, the Philippines was a cheap outsourcing hub. He pictured call center workers reading from scripts, stumbling through grammar, never really conversing. To him, Filipino English was serviceable, but nothing more. Certainly not world-class. And then, piece by piece, the Philippines began to dismantle that belief. On his very first night, sitting in the lounge of his hotel, a young waitress approached him. She smiled and asked, "Would you like to try our signature calamansi iced tea, sir?" Her words were smooth, natural, and warm. Not forced, not stiff, not memorized. Michael blinked. For a moment, he thought she must have rehearsed that one line. He brushed it off. But the next day, when he asked a taxi driver for directions, he was caught off guard again. The man, in casual clothes, switched between Tagalog and English with an ease Michael had never expected. He explained the route clearly, even throwing in a little joke about traffic that made Michael chuckle. Sitting in the back seat, Michael grew quiet. His mind replayed what he had just heard. Could he really be wrong about an entire nation? Old beliefs die hard. For weeks, he clung to his stereotypes. But then came the turning point. At a regional business forum in Makati, a young Filipino woman took the stage. Barely 25 years old, she was tasked with presenting the results of an international English proficiency test. Michael leaned back in his chair, expecting an awkward presentation. But then, the first slide appeared. A glowing map of the world. Countries ranked by their English ability. At the very top, among the usual names, Norway, Sweden, the Netherlands. There it was, bold and undeniable. The Philippines. Michael sat up straighter. He rubbed his eyes, as if checking if he had read it wrong. Around him, the room buzzed with whispers. Some delegates were shocked, some skeptical. But the numbers didn't lie. Filipino students, workers, professionals, ordinary men and women, had tested at levels rivaling, even surpassing, those of wealthy Western nations. And they had done it, not with privilege or expensive training, but with persistence, adaptability, and a culture that turned language into survival and strength. For the first time in years, Michael felt something he wasn't used to feeling: humility. Those results weren't just data points. To him, they were a mirror, reflecting back his own prejudice. And that's when I want to pause and ask you, have you ever been underestimated, only for reality itself to prove your worth? Do you remember that quiet satisfaction, not because you shouted back, but because the truth spoke louder than any defense you could have given. That's what happened that day. For Michael, the test was the crack that split open his certainty. After that, he began to notice things he had ignored before. He noticed not just the English itself, but the spirit behind it. He heard in people's voices not just grammar and vocabulary, but humor, confidence, and heart. One afternoon in Quezon City, he got lost in traffic. Flustered, he asked a group of teenagers for directions. A boy, no older than 16, stepped forward. In English, clear and steady, the boy explained the way, even cracking a joke that made Michael laugh out loud. They weren't graduates of elite universities, just kids in wrinkled uniforms eating street food. Yet their English flowed as naturally as their laughter. And then there was the dinner. Michael was invited to a local partner's home. The house was simple, wooden walls, family photos taped to them, the smell of garlic and rice drifting from the kitchen. 3 generations sat around the table, from grandparents to toddlers. The evening was filled with prayer, stories, and laughter. What struck Michael most wasn't the food or the hospitality. It was the effortless switching of languages. One moment, they prayed in Tagalog. The next, they told stories in English. The little children chimed in without hesitation, their voices bouncing between both tongues as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And that night, as Michael left the modest home, he whispered to himself a confession he never imagined saying. I was wrong, because by then, he understood. Filipino English was not broken. It was not borrowed. It was not second-rate. It was alive, flexible, resilient. A language that carried history, culture, and the quiet strength of a people who had turned mockery into mastery. And that is the story of how one man's prejudice was undone, not by statistics alone, but by moments. Small, ordinary, everyday moments that revealed something extraordinary. At one point, Michael asked the family's eldest daughter, a quiet university student, about her studies. She smiled shyly at first, but when she spoke, her words came in English, fluent and confident, with a rhythm that startled him. I want to become a lawyer one day, she said. English opens doors, not just here, but in the world. We learn it, not because we are forced to, but because it is part of who we are. Her words lingered in the air, like incense after prayer. Part of who we are. For the first time, Michael began to see English in the Philippines differently. It wasn't a borrowed tongue, nor a foreign tool reluctantly picked up for business. It was something woven into daily life, a bridge between provinces, between generations, between Filipinos and the wider world. And yet, beyond fluency, there was something deeper. Michael realized that while many nations used English as a ladder for status, Filipinos used it as a bridge for connection. Whether speaking with a foreign guest, a business partner, or a stranger lost on the road, the goal was never to impress. It was to make the other person feel understood. Michael's heart softened. He remembered his old arrogance, the way he once scoffed at Filipino call center workers. Now he saw them differently. Behind every scripted line he had mocked, there was a person carrying not just memorized words, but the weight of history. A history of colonization, of wars survived, of disasters endured, and through it all, a people who found ways to speak, to connect, to be heard. One Sunday morning, Michael attended a Catholic Mass in Manila. The priest delivered most of the homily in Tagalog, but at certain points, he shifted seamlessly into English. Michael looked around. Not a single person seemed confused. The congregation followed with bowed heads, reverent and unshaken. In that moment, Michael saw something profound. English here was not an intruder. It had become part of the nation's own voice, blending with faith, family, and tradition. Later, walking out of the church into the Manila sunlight, Michael felt a heaviness in his chest. Not a burden, awe. He remembered the international test results he had seen weeks earlier, the ones ranking the Philippines among the world's best. At first, those numbers were just cold statistics to him. But now, after seeing teenagers on the street, families around the dinner table, and worshipers in prayer, the numbers had come alive. They were no longer statistics. They were stories. They were lives. That was when his journey took its first true emotional turn. For the first time in years, Michael felt humbled, not just in thought, but in spirit. He began to write reflections in his journal. Among his notes, one line stood out. The Philippines is not learning English to impress the world. They are speaking it to embrace the world. That sentence would follow him long after his trip ended. But Michael's transformation was only beginning, because soon he would encounter something beyond conversations, beyond dinners, beyond church, something that tested the very core of his beliefs. A moment when the Philippines would not only surprise him, but move him in a way he never expected. That moment came one night he would never forget. It wasn't a dinner with friends. It wasn't a casual chat with strangers. It wasn't even Sunday Mass. It was larger, weightier. A moment when a nation's voice carried across the world stage. Michael had been invited to attend an international education forum in Manila. Delegates from across Asia, Europe, and the Middle East filled the grand ballroom of a hotel. Normally, events like this required translators working overtime. But here, the official language was English. Michael shrugged. He thought it was just formality. After all, conferences needed a common tongue. But when the Filipino delegation began to speak, he realized it was something else entirely. This was not stiff, textbook English. This was not memorized phrases. This was living, breathing, human communication. One by one, Filipino educators, students, and officials took the stage. Their voices carried confidence, fluidity, warmth. There were no awkward pauses, no fear, no hesitation. The words belonged to them. Then came the moment that silenced the room. A young Filipino student, barely in her 20s, was invited to speak about global education. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the microphone. But when she began, her voice was steady, strong, convicted. "We have always been told," she said, "that Filipinos struggle with English, that we are followers, never leaders. But the truth is different. We speak because we want to be heard. We speak because connection matters more than perfection." The audience leaned in. Michael felt his chest tighten. The young woman then revealed the latest English proficiency results. The Philippines ranked among the top in Asia, outperforming wealthier nations, surpassing countries with far greater resources. But she didn't just show numbers. She told the stories behind them. Children in rural schools reading from donated books. Workers in small towns practicing late at night to compete globally. Families passing language down like an heirloom. Not for prestige, but for survival, for opportunity, for connection. And then she paused. Her voice softened, but her words struck like thunder. We did not rise because we were rich. We rose because we refused to be silent. The room erupted in applause. Delegates rose to their feet. The sound filled the hall like a wave. Michael clapped too, but his hands shook. He wasn't just applauding her. He was applauding the revelation that had broken open inside him. For years, he believed the Philippines was behind, forever catching up. But now, he saw the truth. They weren't chasing, they were leading. And they were doing it not with wealth or privilege, but with resilience, faith, and a fierce determination that humbled him to the core. When the session ended, Michael stepped into the corridor, his eyes moist, though he tried to hide it. The words echoed in his mind. We rose because we refused to be silent. It was in that moment his perception truly transformed. He no longer saw English in the Philippines as borrowed, but as a voice uniquely their own, a voice forged by struggle, carried by memory, filled with both pain and hope. Later that night, in his journal, he wrote with trembling hands, I came here believing I was fluent in English. But today, I realized something deeper. These people are fluent not only in language, but in courage. And that realization became the turning point of his journey. Because now, when Michael walked the streets, when he heard children playing, when he prayed beside families, he no longer heard broken English. He heard something greater. He heard a nation speaking with a voice the world could no longer ignore. But even then, his awakening was not complete, because soon Michael would witness something so deeply personal, so unexpected, that it would not just shift his perspective on Filipinos, it would touch something inside his soul. It happened on an evening he hadn't even planned. Tired after a long day of meetings, instead of returning to his hotel, Michael wandered into a small cafe near Intramuros. The cafe was nothing fancy. A few wooden tables, a hum of conversations, the glow of laptops from students who refused to go home early. It was the kind of place where dreams were quietly worked on, night after night, while the city outside kept rushing by. Michael ordered a cup of coffee and sat by the window. He thought he'd be alone, lost in his thoughts. But then he noticed a boy, no older than 12, sitting just across from him. The boy had a tower of old textbooks, their corners bent and pages soft from use. Beside them lay a notebook, scribbled full of English words and phrases. Every few seconds, he would whisper a line to himself, testing it, tasting it, almost like it was a prayer. Michael couldn't help it. Curiosity pulled him forward. Are you studying for school? He asked softly. The boy looked up, startled at first, then gave a shy smile. Yes, sir, for tomorrow's English exam. His voice was careful, but steady. Michael nodded, already impressed. You speak very well. The boy laughed a little and shook his head. Not enough. I want to be better. One day I want to be a teacher, so I can help others. My parents say, English will give me wings. That line froze Michael in place. English will give me wings. It wasn't from a textbook. It wasn't a memorized phrase. It was something far deeper. Words born out of hope, out of sacrifice, out of the belief that language could lift a child higher than circumstance. Michael watched him bend over his notebook again, lips moving, whispering words into the night. Around them the cafe pulsed with life, students reciting lessons, workers typing away, friends laughing softly over coffee. English was everywhere. Not perfect, not polished, but alive. For the first time in years, Michael felt his throat tighten, eyes stinging. He thought of his own childhood, of the privilege he had taken for granted. He had never stayed up past midnight in a cafe, desperately practicing words from another tongue. He had never carried the weight of a dream in a second-hand notebook. The boy carried all of that. "What's your name?" Michael asked finally. "Gabriel," the boy replied, smiling. "It means God is my strength." Michael's chest tightened. There was something sacred in that moment. Gabriel's English wasn't just about words. It was about resilience, faith, a voice determined to rise. And so Michael whispered, almost like a blessing, "God is your strength, and your voice will be your wings." The boy didn't fully understand the weight of the words, but he smiled anyway, grateful. That night, as Michael walked back to his hotel, he carried a heaviness inside him. Yet it wasn't sorrow. It was revelation. For weeks he had been impressed by statistics, humbled by speeches, surprised by rankings. But none of that compared to what he had seen in that small cafe. It wasn't just English. It was dignity. It was faith. It was future. Back in his room, Michael opened his journal again. His words came slower, steadier, heavier. "They told me Filipinos struggle with English, but tonight I saw the truth. Filipinos do not struggle. They soar." Their words carry not just grammar and vocabulary, but heart and hope. Period. And maybe that's why the world cannot ignore them anymore. Period. We get the past before the written words are delivered. This is clear. But Michael had changed. He saw things he had never noticed before. The hotel guard greeting every guest in English, not because he had to, but because he wanted them to feel welcome. The vendor at a stall, explaining the difference between two types of mangoes in English, not for show, but so a foreigner could understand. The grandmother on a bench, chatting in Tagalog with her grandchildren, then turning to Michael with a smile. "Are you enjoying your time here?" These were not performances. They were moments of connection. And suddenly, Michael remembered the girl at the forum who had declared, "We rose because we refused to be silent." The boy Gabriel, whispering English into the night because he believed those words would carry him higher. The countless families, teachers, workers, and children, weaving English into their daily lives, not as an imitation, but as part of their. And then it hit him. For too long, the world had asked the wrong question. Is Filipino English as polished as London, as sleek as New York? But that was never the point. The real question was this: whose English carries more heart? Whose English carries more hope? Whose English is spoken not to dominate, but to connect? The answer was clear. On his last night, Michael stood on the rooftop of his hotel, looking out over the endless sprawl of Manila. He whispered 3 words to himself: respect, gratitude, admiration. They had said Filipinos struggled with English, but they were wrong. The Philippines was not struggling. The Philippines was leading. On the plane home, he wrote his final words: "The world measures nations by wealth, by weapons, by skyscrapers, but true strength may be measured by voice." And the Philippines has a voice the world needs, resilient, faithful, hopeful. A voice that speaks not just in English, but to the soul. And now I turn to you, dear viewer, because this is not just Michael's story. This is the story of every Filipino child practicing late at night, every worker pushing through exhaustion, every family teaching English not for pride, but for love and opportunity. So when someone says, Filipinos struggle with English, remember this. The world already knows the truth, and the truth is simple. Filipinos don't just speak English, they give it wings. And when Filipinos speak, the world listens.